co-chairs of Watersprite. I'd just like to say thank you to you all for coming to the opening night of our second year of the festival. We really appreciate it. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to our patron, Hilary Bevan Jones. In her real life, Hilary is a very successful producer and former chair of BAFTA. In her Watersprite life, she's an unstinting rock of support and has been since her involvement in the initial festival last year. Hilary.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Alice. Good evening, everybody. It's a real privilege to be the patron of Watersprite, and just watching how it's evolved over the last year has been very exciting. And the festival itself is a festival that's by students, run by students, for new emerging talent. And we have a mission, and our mission is to establish a thriving international festival that recognises and rewards emerging talent, that inspires and informs young filmmakers, and that provides a free meeting ground for students and key industry professionals. And we're building on the free side of it. The admission to everything is free. Our goal is next year to raise even more sponsorship so that when the nominees, all nominees that can attend, we can help subsidise them. We've managed to help a bit with floors, that sort of thing, and couches, but we'd love to do a bit more. So all the time we want to be able to attract, and any of the nominees that are here tonight, I know a lot are coming, but welcome and congratulations for your fantastic work. So this is our second year, and as I say, a lot's happened. The festival was initiated and chaired by Francie Florac, who is here this evening, I'm delighted to say. We're really lucky that two of the members of last year's committee, Ellie and Alice, have agreed to be the co-chairs of this year's festival, and they have put in round the clock. It's been like having two lives for them. They also put in a fantastic committee, 20 people working on 5 different teams. So we have the event team led by Sandy Levy, marketing with Ross Harrison, submissions team with Rachel Poyner, and then we also had Gideon Farrell, who looked after all of the website. And another dream is that next year we can put some more money into the website so that we can grow that as well. So festival organisation, like filmmaking, is a collaborative process, but it's one that carries very similar challenges. Like filmmaking, you have crises, you have deadlines, you have very little budget, if any, but our committee has encountered all of them, and I do want to thank everybody because you've been dedicated and you've kept going and jumped all the obstacles faultlessly. Standard of entries has been exceptional. We've had way over 20 countries, I believe, 5 continents, and we had the juries, the final juries sat down in London, and they're comprised of industry professionals, students, and were chaired by the committees, all of whom had a proper BAFTA training course so that they knew exactly how to chair a jury. So they were really efficient, and so many of the professionals came away saying, my goodness, what standards, I forgot I was watching student films, they were so inspiring. So and the films themselves, please go and see as many as you can. There's a fantastic range. Obviously they have different flavours because they come from so many countries. They're evocative, they're adrenaline fueled, they're sad, they're funny, they're great. And I was told recently by Duncan Kenworthy, who's a brilliant filmmaker, film producer, he said filmmaking is an act of generosity. It's a labour of love, it's a communal activity. That's rare in the art world. Often art worlds is people on their own. And this generosity has been shown by our partners and our sponsors. And I'd like to thank you, because without your support, we wouldn't exist. And I'd like to list them all, because we're very grateful. So YouTube, To Lake Beach, Met Films, Working Title Films, Cambridge University Press, Barclays Wealth, RailSimulator.com, Double Negative, Shooting People, Molinaire and John Lewis. And then our partners, thank you to the Varsity Hotel for looking after us so well. Thank you to Emmanuel College, and of course thank you to the Cambridge Union Society for your valuable hospitality. We're grateful to BAFTA because they've been extremely supportive, and they're hosting screenings of their nominated short films from this year, and that, as well as the closing event, which we're back here featuring Bill Nye and his life in pictures. And my final thanks are to all our speakers, and they're kindly given up their time voluntarily to join us this weekend, and they'll share their wealth of experience and insight into the film world. So now I'd like to welcome our guests for this evening's opening discussion on the state of the industry. We'll have the chair of the Union Society, Lauren Davidson. We have an Oscar and BAFTA winning film producer, David Parfitt, who is also previous chairman of BAFTA. We have a brilliant documentary filmmaker, Brian Woods, who's will be talking tomorrow as well, and his programmes really have changed lives and have won countless awards. And finally, we are very lucky to welcome Tanya Sagatsian, who stepped in at the last minute, literally the last minute, for Tim Bevan, who unfortunately just couldn't be here at the final hour. But Tanya is also an award-winning film producer, and she is now the head of the Film Fund at the UK Film Council. And so amongst her amazing credits, she's also one of the people responsible for funding amazing films, for example, The King's Speech. So what an extraordinary panel we've got. I welcome you all. Have a brilliant weekend. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I won't do another introduction. We're all quite introduced to the evening, but it is a question and answer on the state of the industry, so we're going to jump right in. David, you might want to answer this question first, and then we'll open up to Tanya and Brian.
Straight in. Right.
Straight in. If you do a quick scan of the top 50 highest grossing films of all time, you can see only a few of them, in fact only a couple, have received either a BAFTA or an Oscar for Best Film or Picture, and that's from the Lord of the Rings franchise. Do you think this proves that commerciality and artistic endeavour are just not compatible?
That's very interesting. I mean, in some ways, I might be the wrong person to ask, because probably my two most commercially successful films both got BAFTAs. So I'm not, I mean, maybe that, I don't know if that blows it out the water, really.
Oh, well, just
it's well, it's just, I mean, I don't think it does work like that. I mean, how do you judge commercial success is one thing. If you make a film for £1 million and it takes 5 million at the box office, it won't be the highest grossing film of the year, but it made a tremendous profit, probably. And, you know, the films, I don't think it is that it's just the, if you like, the sort of arts films that win awards. I think if you look at last year, Hurt Locker was something that was produced relatively cheaply and had huge commercial success and won an Oscar and won a BAFTA. So no, I don't agree that that's the case.
Do either of you want to say?
I think, you know, you mentioned the top 50 grossing films, but the fact is that that's a very selective lens to look at, because high grossing feature films make huge amounts of money, and they are the blockbusters. They're the ones that the studios, in the Hollywood studios, are desperate to find. But that only represents actually a very small amount of the huge range of film across the piece.
I think I'd have to agree with the other two, that in the end, high-grossing films are often high-grossing films because a huge amount of money has been put towards the marketing, the advertising, the promotion of those films. And so sometimes the films that have greater artistic credentials but don't necessarily have the kind of budgets to promote them don't get the look in at the box office, but when people sit down and actually evaluate the year, they can see that they were the ones that stood out or remained in their memory, and that's where they get the recognition. But I don't think the two are mutually exclusive.
I mean, if you look at something like Slumdog Millionaire from a couple of years ago, that very nearly didn't get released. You know, it was sort of on a knife edge. It was only due to a couple of people banging away and eventually getting into a festival, and then it winning the audience award at that festival. But then the studio, which had been planning to send it straight to DVD because they didn't think it was very good, because people at studios are so clever, they then decided, oh, well, people seem to like it. Maybe we'll try and release it a bit, and then the rest is history.
Or if we turn around and we look at the King's Speech, which this year has defied all expectations, both in terms of awards recognition at both the BAFTAs and the Oscars, where it won the top creative awards. That's a relatively small budget film, which has gone on to be the most commercially successful British independently financed film. It's become one of the big films in the big commercial grossing charts internationally and in the UK, and that again was started off with relatively modest ambitions. So
it is hard to define commercial, though, isn't it? I think that's perhaps too broad a term. I mean, you could take those 50 top grossing, and I'm sure that they are all very profitable films, but you don't have to go terribly far down the list to find things that will gross very well, but won't necessarily be the most profitable.
And speaking of films like The King's Speech and money in film, I mean, it might seem that it's easier to get the go-ahead for a film like sort of the Scary Movie film rather than The King's Speech. And do you think the industry has always been so risk-averse, and is this here to stay, or are we seeing a change in the industry now?
Well, again, it's one of those things where asking me that question, I might have a different point of view, because as I run the film funds at the UK Film Council, our remit is to not be risk-averse and to try and provide an alternative where, in actual fact, if you can't get funding elsewhere, but you have a project of quality, we will endeavour to make the difference or make the project happen. So the legitimacy behind my job is that we take more risks than others. What it actually feels like as a producer may be very, very different, and I don't know whether or not David thinks that people are more or less risk-averse, and whether as an industry we are increasingly more or less risk-averse. So.
I mean, I don't feel it's changed hugely. I mean, it's always amazing to me that you can... I've made a lot of period films, and yet every time I take out a new script that happens to be period, they will say there is no market for period films. And you can say, well, these ones did okay, and some of them were mine and some of them weren't, but they still say there is no market for period films. So they're just wrong. There's no market for some period films, but I think period films that have contemporary resonance, or that are just things like The King's Speech, which are brilliantly acted and brilliantly written, there's always a market for those. But it's very hard. It doesn't get any easier to get the money.
And it must be even harder to get the money as a documentarian.
Well, I mean, the thing is that the vast majority of documentary output in the UK is on television, and we're fantastically lucky in Britain, probably more than any other country in the world, in having the BBC and Channel 4 and a long tradition of documentary on both those channels. So there is a great place that anyone who wants to make feature documentaries can learn the trade and can learn, can make all their mistakes on television, paid for by the BBC or by Channel 4. So it's incredibly hard to get money for a feature doc, but then often quite good, great feature docs like the one about the guy who eats hamburgers. I can't remember the name. Super Size Me, thank you. Was actually made for very little. You can also if you're Michael Moore, then yes, you can easily spend $25 million on a film. But most documentary makers can't, because A, they can't get that money, and B, they don't actually need that much money. I mean, the last feature documentary I made was we made for £40,000, and you can make a drama for that, but it's easier to make a documentary for it.
I mean, you said things like Scary Movie. I mean, it's certainly the case that I think that an audience of 18 to 25-year-olds do obviously go to the cinema much more often. And one of the things that I think we all struggle with is getting an older audience out. Again, King's Speech has done that very well, but it couldn't have done it on that alone. It's the fact that it's crossed over. But you start doing this thing of it's very bad, but you tend to make films that you would like to see yourself, and then you find yourself getting older and realising you don't go to the cinema. And that's quite worrying.
But maybe there's something in that we always say it's the financiers or the studios are becoming more and more risk averse, but maybe the audiences are becoming more and more risk-averse too. And, you know, Scary Movie 4 or Harry Potter 7 or Lord of the Rings whatever, or Star Wars 6, or which, you know, maybe in the end the audiences are looking for the same thing, and that sense of familiarity has become part of what they understand cinema to be. When we were growing up, actually what you wanted to see was something unfamiliar and something surprising every time you went to the cinema, and yet we seem to have emerged in a culture where there's something rather nice about knowing what's coming, and the culture of watching DVDs over and over again, or being able to recite every line in a movie, means that familiarity is something that people are more comfortable with than they were before. And that might be a radical interpretation, that I'm just picking up on this notion of who is risk averse. Is it us? Is it you? Is it the whole business? You know? And what is risk?
Well, just to backtrack to Brian, what you said something about before, there seems to be a rise in cinema documentaries over the last 10 years by quite a considerable amount, and also in this kind of celeb documentarian. I mean, what do you think this says about the industry, and can you think of why this has happened?
I mean, I think there are one or two people like Michael Moore and Nick Broomfield who are sort of responsible for the rise of the celeb documentarian, Michael Moore particularly. And I certainly the last time I looked, the sort of top 10 grossing cinema documentaries, most of them were Michael Moore films. Bowling for Columbine, I think, was the number one. Oh no, Fahrenheit. Oh, I can't remember which one. One of his was way ahead. You know, had made far more money than any other documentary, and that's partly because he's funny, and it's partly because he, makes entertaining films, and people ultimately, yes, they like the idea that they're going to go to the cinema and they're going to, learn something or have some prejudice about the right wing reinforced, but the fact is that they also want to be entertained, and he makes very entertaining films, and people know they're entertaining. And one of the challenges with documentary, particularly feature documentary, is that there's a tradition, certainly in this country, there's a tradition that we can see documentaries for free any night. You can turn on BBC One probably tonight there are probably 5 or 6 original documentaries on the 20 or so channels that we've got. So it's easy to see documentaries for free, and that's what we're used to. Asking someone to pay £6, £10, £12 to go and see one, it's a higher bar, and you've got to have something pretty special. And if it's from Michael Moore, then that's the documentary equivalent of it having Helen Mirren in the lead role. If it's got Helen Mirren in it, it's probably going to be quite good, so we might as well go and see it because we like Helen Mirren. It's the same thing with that sort of celeb documentarian in a way.
Well, speaking of Helen Mirren, in a speech at the Hollywood Reporter's annual Women in Entertainment Breakfast, she sort of had a go at the industry for supporting young men and sort of noting that good actresses don't really have a career after the age of 40 and that men can go forever regardless of actually how talented they are. Do you think that's an inevitability in the industry and that women just need to accept that? Or that's a difficult question.
I would hate to think you have to accept that. I mean, I wanted to be an actress. When I was here, I thought I would be one, and not because I was talented, but my vanity and ambition was such that I thought it was possible. But I remember being here at Cambridge, and in my second or third year, I took a realistic look at what that would mean as a career, and I thought, if I'm lucky, I might get parts till I'm about 25, 26, playing the girl, the love interest, the young daughter, and then, particularly on the stage, there wouldn't be anything, and then I could be a mother a bit, and then there wouldn't be anything, and then if I was lucky, I'd be a wise old woman. And I didn't want that. That wasn't the life I wanted. I wanted to keep working through my life, and I looked at theatre, and I looked at the kind of stuff on television, and I realised that women seem to cease to exist between the ages of 25 and 40, and then at 40 they might get, a few of them might get some sort of a go at it, and then they'd disappear until they were old enough to play character actor parts later on in life. And so I chose not to go into acting. I don't know whether it's easier or better, but I can say that having Helen Mirren or Judi Dench in your movie now means an awful lot more than having Gwyneth, possibly. I don't know. So actually, whilst the psychology of parts and writing may have changed. I don't think we can give up, and I think particularly as women who want to act or want to write or want to direct or produce stories that are engaging to women of all ages, we just have to keep trying and probably excelling and being better than anyone else at it so that we get noticed.
I did the men want to give an opinion on that?
I think partly Helen Mirren was addressing the Hollywood in terms of, undoubtedly, there's truth in that. Recently at the BBC they lost the tribunal over firing the presenter of Country Files. So it works in television as well, and it works in British film as well. But particularly with Hollywood, because Hollywood is focused on making a particular type of film, and those are, they're either action movies, which have men in doing stuff, shooting people and charging around the place, and if there's a woman in it, then she's the love interest, so she has to be young and attractive. Or they're doing rom-coms, which are another genre of big grossing films, and again, if it's a rom-com, then you need a male and a female young good-looking person in it. So it is that particular part of the industry, especially, is very much about looks, and there aren't very many older, ugly actors, other than the ones who get the parts for older, ugly people.
And I 100% agree with both, and it is terribly difficult. The only thing I would say, I think it has got slightly better. I mean, there have been some really good examples this year. The Kids Are All Right, obviously, two great roles for women, and you see actresses as well now coming through, like Helena Bonham Carter, and as she's heading towards 50, is just keeping going and doing better and better work. And I think the other positive thing is the young male hunks don't survive if they can't act. The older ones that have got through are the ones that can actually do it. So that's slightly reassuring. But it is a problem. It is a problem.
I think, if I can keep us talking about this, just because it is something that's of great interest to me, it's also that thing, it may be a problem for women not just on screen, it's what happens as you get older. Are there the great opportunities for you? And I was thinking the other day about Meryl Streep and Meryl Streep's men in movies. And if you look at Meryl Streep's career from her first performances through to what she's doing now, she's sort of been paired up with almost all the great men on screen. But at this point in her career, when she finds a mate on screen, he's generally not as great a mate as the mates she was mating with before. So, has that meant that she's got to the point where she's the star element now, and the men of her peer group and age group aren't quite as strong as she is, or that's just the parts that she's getting? She was with Clint Eastwood and Robert Redford and with men who were substantially older than her in a lot of the parts that she was originally given, and now she's Mamma Mia.
Speaking of genre of film, as you mentioned before, so for the last 4 years, Rotten Tomatoes have shown that Pixar films like Up and Ratatouille and Toy Story were most popular with audiences and critics alike. But do you think that we'll ever get to the place where animation films will be classed in the same category as non-animation films when it comes to BAFTAs and Oscars?
Yes, I think we saw, what was the one this year? What was the Toy Story 3, which was a fantastic script, and that was nominated, I think, at the Oscars as Best Film and Best Animation. And they are just amazing scripts, and that's what does it. It doesn't matter whether they're animation
will they
or
win?
not. Yeah, I think they will. I absolutely think they will.
The thing about awards, though, is that awards are... The way awards work, I'm a fan of BAFTA, so I would say it's worse with the Oscars, but the lobbying that goes on and the politicking and the snobbery and the cliques and all this kind of stuff that goes on around awards does mean that it's sort of is going to be harder. And with Lord of the Rings, it was the last of, after this extraordinary blockbuster with some amazing movies had gone through. It was only the very last one that finally the Oscars kind of went, I suppose we'd better recognise that it's done. And I suspect that the final Harry Potter will probably it'll be that kind of almost a lifetime achievement. You know, we've made 8 of them, so we'll be in an award now.
We did the lifetime achievement.
We did that.
Yeah, that's true. But somehow, I mean, I know, you know, that in a year there's probably 450, 500 films that are up for consideration or qualify for awards. And in the end, it always gets down to sort of 30 or under that are really serious contenders. And it obviously doesn't mean that the rest are not worthy, but somehow, as you say, marketing narrows it down, and audience response too. But in spite of that, you know, some of the films that find their way through are of terrific quality. So I don't know how we sort of filter that, but somehow the industry deals with it. And sometimes it's marketing, and sometimes it's just quality.
I also think, you know, the generation that have grown up on Pixar probably don't see the distinction between an animated film and a live-action film that our generations did, because we weren't as fortunate to have as many animated films that weren't in the mould of a Disney animation when we were watching movies. So that generation is going to end up getting the votes, and that generation will institute change. So if we're slow to vote them in, they will get there in the end, because they are amongst the most talented people working in the industry. So.
And also the lines are becoming increasingly blurred. I mean, you know, was Avatar an animated film? It was sort of, you know, sort of was a bit. It's at what point does it stop being animated, and does it just become, oh, that's CGI and that's different to animation?
Well, speaking of a film like Avatar with CGI, there's been another huge leap in the use of special effects in films that have been coming out recently. For example, Avatar is one of the highest grossing films ever, was praised for its fantastic effects and how beautiful everything looked in it, but then again it was panned for its dialogue and plot. So do you think that the use of special effects compromises the dialogue and plot side of the films, or can they be worked together?
Shall I go first? I don't think it has to. Yeah. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. The amount of work that went into Avatar, many, many years of development, I thought there was perhaps something more interesting to say. So no, I don't think it's the effects that do it, because also we're all using effects now that nobody really notices in all our films. You know,
yeah, I mean,
we rely on that technology. You know, that technology has just become part of everyday filmmaking. It's just those are flagged as being effects-based films.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Social Network is a great example of amazing CGI in that one actor played 2 twins, and, you know, one actor was chatting away to himself, and you would never have known. There's no way you would know that was the same person.
And also, the original actor had been replaced. Yeah. So there was another actor, and they decided they didn't, for whatever reason, want that, and so they put another head on his body, and, you know, it's fantastic work.
Great. Well, speaking of Avatar being panned, and you sort of mentioned before the people in the industry don't know what they're talking about, how is it that bad films get made? How do they get put through? How do they get funding?
I don't know if Avatar is a bad
film. I didn't say that.
There are lots and lots of bad films.
Tons of bad films, but that's just a different. It's like a different way of making films, a different way of entertaining, and plenty of room for that, and obviously a huge audience out there for it.
Oh, I didn't mean to say that Avatar was bad. It was
okay,
a somewhat tangential link between my bad films question.
I mean, I don't think anyone sets out to make a bad film, but some people succeed.
You said before that Slumdog Millionaire almost didn't get publicly released. So how could it be that a film like that just slips through and just happened to have got lucky to get published?
Because it ultimately often comes down to the opinions of maybe one person. You know, in some cases, it's one person's opinion that matters, and everyone around that one person is sycophantic and desperately trying to second guess what that person thinks because they're the big cheese and they're important.
I mean, in the Slumdog case, the part of the studio that financed the film and was supposed to distribute it was being closed down. So it was the victim of a change of regime, and then when the decision as to whether or not to invest in the release was made, that bit of the division of the company had been closed or was going to be closed anyway. So sometimes the releases or the problems come out of regime changes or political moments that compromise things, and then an awful lot of other times it's just that the thing doesn't live up to the expectation or the promise of what everyone thought it could or might have been. And the depressing truth is that happens. In the end, when you set out to make a film or invest in a film, you're looking for the very, very best possible expression of what that film might be. And sometimes it just doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to. And it's heartbreaking and financially very, very costly. But it is an alchemical, magical process. And when it works, it's extraordinary. But when it doesn't, it's just bleak.
And as Brian said, I mean, you never set out to make a bad film. We can all come up with examples of fantastic teams of people who've been put together, the best writers, the best directors, the best actors, and it, as you said, just the chemistry just doesn't work. And also sometimes it can be teams behind the studios, teams of marketeers who for various reasons don't believe certain formats are going to work because perhaps there was a disaster last year with a particular genre, so therefore it's sort of everything else is tarred with the same brush. And if we all knew how to do it, we'd be very, very wealthy, and nobody does. And it's the same in theatre, it's the same in television, it's the same in film. You try and do the best you can, and it sometimes doesn't work.
I mean, it's interesting because we're all, three of us are all members of BAFTA, and voting film members get this pile of DVDs around December, and hopefully you've seen some or many of them in the cinema. But over December, the studios send to all of the BAFTA voting members DVDs of the films that they're entering. So you get maybe 40 or 50 DVDs piled high, and some of those, many of them you'll have seen, others you'll have heard about and think, oh great, that's a good opportunity. And then there'll always be a sort of a dozen or so that you think, oh, I've never heard of that, I don't know what that is. And you'll read the blurb on the cover and you think, oh, that sounds good, great. You stick it in the DVD player. And 10 minutes and you're thinking, why was this ever made? It's bad. The acting's wooden, the dialogue's just so horrible, and somehow they have been made.
And how do they get shortlisted then?
Well, they don't get shortlisted. They're just entered. Yes.
So any of the 400 odd films can be sent to the members.
Okay.
But the one thing to say about the bad films is in the learning process that we all go on, you tend to learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. So for everybody who's had success and failure shouldn't deter you from trying again, because sometimes that's where you learn what not to do next time around.
We spoke before about some really fantastic animated films that have been coming out over the last few years. There seems to be a rise in kids' films as well, not necessarily the animated films are for kids, but do you think this is because Hollywood has realised that they could cash in on children, or why do you think it is that we have this? Well,
I if I can step in there, it's just that I was lucky enough to be at the beginning of the Harry Potter phenomenon, because when I started in the film business, the first film I made was the first Harry Potter film, and I was working for a company that had a deal with Warner Brothers, and we were just told to go and find something that we could get out of England that no one else was going to get to first. And there weren't very many people interested in children's film at the time. So I was looking in the children's film arena or children's books arenas to find something so that we could try and make something that was unfamiliar. And when we came up with the idea of doing Harry Potter, nobody other than the kids knew what it was. And that seems inconceivable now, but it was only in 1997. So at that moment in time, nobody had quite clocked on to the fact that if you've got the kids, you've got the parents, you've got the grandparents, you've got the repeat business, you've got the DVDs, and that was the way to make money. And now it seems inconceivable that there was a time when that wasn't the primary attention of everybody. So I think we just found a gap in the market, and it's been filled in such a way as it will probably remain the centre of attention for most people making properties now.
But the franchise potential is important in that, isn't it? Because I know, having tried to get a couple of children's films, well, not even children's, young adult films off the ground, it is still very difficult to do without the possibility of more. But again, that thing of, however well those films are done, it still doesn't seem to convince all the executives that that's a good idea. Because, it's not Harry Potter.
I'm going to change tack slightly. There's been a lot of commentary about financial effects of piracy, but arguably less so about how piracy affects the type of films that get made. I was wondering what your opinions were on the fact that we as the piracy generation, what are we actually doing to the industry as a whole, and how are we affecting the future of the kind of films that get produced?
Who wants to go on that?
I think I'll say something, which is that I mostly make campaigning documentary, and not many people watch my films. I'll be happy if I get 1 million watching something when it goes out on Channel 4 or on BBC 4. I'll be delighted if I get 1 million. I'll be stunned if I get 1 million on BBC 4. But I make those films in order to try and have some impact, some social impact. So when people pirate my films, I'm quite pleased, really, because it means they're being watched. And, I'd rather they were watched. So I don't mind.
Go ahead.
Well, I love the fact you call yourself the piracy generation, and if that's what you feel you are, then I think the really interesting thing for us to think about is, well, what is it that the piracy generation want to see? Because maybe if we can understand what it is you want to see, we'll work out how to feed you in the right way, and maybe to figure out how to get you to pay for seeing it rather than to pirate it.
I suppose with the piracy generation, because it's only recently that you've had things like Wi-Fi and cheap online streaming and the technology to film something in your pocket, essentially, while you're at the cinema. The thing is, I don't know, we're all morally corrupt. Maybe we are.
I mean, it undoubtedly has an effect. We've seen, pretty much DVD dying off as a secondary market, and we've sort of got to change the way we do things, I think, because the way it tends to work at the moment is that a theatrical release in the cinemas isn't always seen as being a profitable part of the business. A lot of the time you're putting all your marketing in there to really then promote your other markets in terms of DVD, other secondary markets. And that has been very badly hit, and I think probably the middle market has been hit quite hard. So, in fact, the sorts of budgets that I tend to work at are now very hard to raise because they cannot take that DVD income as being guaranteed. So, but I've sort of realised that we've been very slow to pick up on this, even slower than the music industry. And if there's a positive side to it, I think it has had the effect, certainly with sort of my older kids, of perhaps broadening their tastes, that they've actually gone out and taken the easy stuff to download and it's got them looking for more. And I hope that as we then get this sort of business model in order, that will be a very well-educated film watching generation. So there's probably a long-term benefit, but it's been really, really hard, very painful over the last 5 to 10 years. And pretty brutal for independent filmmakers.
I think it comes back to that question you asked earlier on about risk averse and what we were saying about what is it that the audience appetite is for now. Is the audience appetite for things that they know about, the things that they're likely to pirate, the things they're likely to have heard about? And so what happens to the other stuff that they don't know about, that they won't pirate because they don't know that it exists, but now no one can really afford to make because it's expensive, and if you don't have a market for it or any chance of getting your revenues back, then you're unlikely to invest in it, and therefore financiers will be more risk averse. So we've all mutually got to find a solution for this, otherwise we're going to end up having less interesting material generated for us, and that's not good. But I don't quite know what the
Speed is
solution
part of it as well.
Yeah.
People are no longer prepared to wait for the windows that we have controlled. If you think about it, long before I got into the industry, films would go out on the road for 2 to 5 years, where they wouldn't do a multi-thousand screen release. If you look back to things like The Sound of Music, they would have released in major cities, and then it would have toured. That print would have toured like a play. And, where I was brought up in Sunderland, we'd get things a year later, not 6 weeks later. And that's just closed up and closed up and closed up. We started to control that very well by saying, right, there's a year where you can only see it in cinema, and then it'll be out on DVD, or 6 months. We can't do that anymore because there is a demand to see it now. And some people prefer to watch it at home, and some people prefer to watch it in the cinemas. Cinemas are doing great, so there is a market there. We've just got to be smarter, I think.
And I think technology is always chasing as well, because there's things like digital cinemas help, because that means you then don't have the cost of the print. You know, it's just, what, £20,000 for a film print compared to sort of about £1,000 to do it digitally. So you can that means that it's much cheaper to get it to a lot of cinemas once the cinemas have digital projectors, decent digital projectors in them. That helps. 3D is another thing that you know, people aren't going to be able to. People can't yet pirate 3D. You know, it takes a little while to work out how to pirate 3D, and they haven't got there yet. So, well, I think that's part of the reason for the sort of sudden excitement about 3D, which has been around for, what, 50 years or so, but now it's suddenly, in the last, you know, since Avatar, everyone wants to do so. You know, people are talking about doing documentaries in 3D now. Can't quite see why, but it just makes it a lot harder to make. But
what do you see as the future of 3D? Do you think it will catch on in a more widespread way, or will people get bored of it?
Oh, I think that once they've cracked the screens that you can watch without glasses, then, I mean, you know, at the moment you go to the cinema and you put the glasses on and you're kind of prepared to do that because it's fun. But you know, the TVs that are at the moment that they're producing, which are using polarized light, the same as the cinemas to produce the 3D effect, are sort of, anyone who buys one of those is stupid, because they're going to be obsolete in about 2 years. Because as soon as they've got, you know, they're also working on prismatic screens that just send the two different images out at slightly different angles. And once they've cracked that, so you can sit and look at a flat screen and see the 3D image, then that's then going to drive the demand for 3D television very fast, and that's going to then help the technology. It's going to feed its way into film, even, you know, it's going to make the uptake even faster. I'm sure we'll all be watching 3D television. I'm sure everyone will have a 3D television probably within 5 years or so.
Go back to digital cinemas as well. We're being very slow there too, because even though Film Council led and, you know, got digital cinema out to a lot more places, it can't work if there's only one or two in a multiplex, because what happens is that your film goes out digitally, and what the owners do is, while it's popular in its first couple of weeks, it plays the big screen, then they need to move it to another screen. And then they need a print, because they haven't got enough projectors. So until we go completely digital, it's not really doing the favour to the smaller films that it should, except for the very niche films, because they just go out and play, you know, smaller arts cinemas. But actually, it's not. And prints are only now $1,000. So it's the transport of those, not the way the cinemas project.
And for the cinemas, you know, they go, well, why should we invest? Why should we pay all this money for all this kit? You know, why should we put whatever £20,000-30,000 per screen into investing in these digital projectors when the beneficiaries are the big beneficiaries are the distributors? You know, the studios. They should be paying for this stuff.
And a projector that was put into a cinema in the 30s can still project the films that we put out today. So why would you change? It's such solid technology, but it'll have to happen.
But all those technology issues are fascinating as well when you look at the piracy generation and their attitude towards viewing, because, you know, the ease with which people are happy to watch a small screen or an iPhone or download something and watch it on a computer whilst doing something else means that the whole notion of viewing habits and viewing habits of cinema of films that would have been called cinema or theatric films has changed so radically anyway that that's going to change too. Your expectation of the quality of what you're looking at, how big it is, may be less important than whether or not you can watch it before the person sitting next to you. You know, that may be the key determining factor.
For particular
types of films, yeah.
Okay. I think at this point we'll open up to the floor. Has anybody got any questions they might like to ask our panel this evening?
In the context of the piracy generation, maybe a different revenue-generating model is the answer. The situation in India is that one big distributor bought out most of Bollywood, didn't they? And because they were manufacturing the product as well, they were able to drop their prices, compete with the pirates. You could have product placement within your movies, you could have advertisements tacked onto the front, and you could encourage people to share this product and perhaps derive revenues from other streams. I don't know whether that sort of thing would work.
Well, I think all sorts of, I mean, everybody's desperate to try and make money out of the product, so every form of possible new revenue streams are being explored in one shape or form. So.
I mean, one interesting thing there is, of course, a lot of the pressure comes back onto the producers and the budgets, which is actually the wrong place, because where the money is made is not there, it's at distribution level. So they need to cut their margins, because we've been squeezed. I mean, our budgets are the same as they were 10 years ago, in some cases lower, but the ticket prices have gone up, and their cut is just the same as it always was. So I think that it's further up the chain from me, certainly.
Any other questions?
You mentioned 3D. Do you think that 3D filmmakers will learn how to use 3D properly and give you a window onto a 3D world, rather than thrusting things into your face, which are obviously much too close to you to be real, and cause terrible eye strain for the older viewers because they can't accommodate?
No, I think that's right, and I think the best filmmakers are doing that. And I think, again, funny enough, Toy Story was a case in point where there were a couple of those moments early on, but actually it just gave dimension to it, and it wasn't all about the tricks. And I think that's right. People need to use it in a more everyday way.
And I think what Brian was saying about once 3D television is just the common thing, we will suddenly understand that the 3D dimension is about the 3D world, not about tricks and gags and just trying to draw attention to things.
And it's like any new technology, filmmakers will learn about it more. When colour film was first invented, they dressed people in lots of garish colours because they thought that looked great. And then people gradually changed and learned more about how to use it. And colour's a bad example, but there are lots of other technologies in film, CGI and things like that, where the more experience you get with a particular technology, the better you get at it.
Although we've been very slow, of course, because it's one of the oldest technologies. And in fact, they had 3D cinema without glasses in the 1950s.
But it's also really complicated because the way it works in terms of how far apart the two lenses are and the parallax between the two lenses and what effect that then gives when you're watching it is very, very complex, and not many people are sort of very good at getting it. The digital, when it's a completely digitally created space, like Toy Story or Ice Age 3D or any of those pure animations, it's actually much easier to manipulate that and then to create a convincing 3D image. When you're shooting something in 3D, then the complexities of, you think, you just get two cameras and put them next to each other, but it's how far apart they are and what where the point of convergence is completely changes the effect for the viewer in a way that people aren't really quite getting their head around yet.
How do you think the landscape of British film is going to change with the abolishment of the British Film Council?
That's a good question. I think Tanya should answer that.
No, I think I have to go last. I don't think I can start.
There's a few conflicts here, not between us, but I've just taken over as chairman of Film London, who are taking some of the responsibilities from the old UK Film Council, so I should state that up front. I still think the abolition of the UK Film Council was a huge mistake. It was a well-constructed organisation, efficiently run, doing its job properly, and the DCMS did not think about it before they did it. And in fact, anyone goes online, you can see the Audit Commission report that came out yesterday showing that their numbers don't add up either, and they've been criticised for that. It was a really stupid thing to do. However, it is done, and so we all have to live with it. The good thing is, I'm sure Tanya will confirm, the lottery funding is unaffected. The tax credit is unaffected. I think we've now saved the statistics unit, which was something that a lot of the film community was very worried about, because we need to know what we're doing to know how to do it better, and Film Council are doing that, and I believe that's been saved. The Film London are taking over the responsibility for inward investment and promoting British film abroad through the British Film Commission. And that again will heavily reduced budget, but it will still exist. So hopefully, certainly the message I'll be taking out to LA quite soon is business as usual, it's all still here.
Well, I mean, I think, David has very elegantly expressed the reality of the situation, which is that it was a dreadful, careless act of political vanity, and it was ill thought out, it was irresponsible, and to live in a society where the Secretary of State for Culture is able to act on a whim without doing any research into what the right thing to do is, and to act against the better judgment of the rest of his colleagues and his department and the organisation that had been set up in order to benefit the culture of the state is a terrible place to be. But fortunately, the film industry have rallied together to try and ensure that we can make the best out of a bad situation, and that whilst there will be an effect of the last year's carelessness in the future, I think, in the long run, the fact that there is money for film, that there is still a tax credit, and there are still individuals with skill operating their expertise is going to be a positive thing.
The other thing to say is one of the things in the setting up of the Film Council, which, Tanya, I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that they looked at it and said this should not be something administered by civil servants. What it should be done is run by people with experience of filmmaking, who should come in mainly for a limited amount of time, maybe 3 to 5 years, to bring their expertise and share it with the community. And therefore those people needed to be paid a reasonable amount of money to give up their other careers or take time out from their other careers to do it. So the very thing that the government criticised was what made the Film Council special and efficient. It was really done.
So the effects of recession on hopefully recovery and picking up again, is this a good time to get into the industry? Is the industry actually feeling the recovery?
I think we're doing fine. I mean, it's very busy at the moment. There are lots of weird things that affect us. The biggest of all is the exchange rate, actually. And the exchange rate is quite sort of steady to the dollar at the moment, so lots of big American films are coming in and filling the studios, taking advantage of the tax credit. So in terms of career starters, it probably isn't a bad time actually to be going into the industry, because it is busy. But of course, the difficulty is how we sustain that, because if the exchange rate moves, if the tax credit changes, if someone else in Europe offers a better deal to Hollywood, they will go. So, as always, it's a career. It's a tricky career to be in, but it's not a bad time to start.
I mean, I think I'd have to agree with David in the sense that for you guys, the opportunities are there, and in many ways there are greater opportunities because it's not as unionised, it's not as closed. There are more people who are looking for diversity and equality of opportunity, particularly at a first, second, third time emerging talent level for filmmakers. So there's a way to get in if you're creative or you're practically interested in the technology and you want to get on and make films. I think the thing is you have to appreciate that it is a freelance business, and therefore if you don't have the kind of character or personality that can cope with dips, periods of unemployment and of uncertainty, then it's probably not the right industry for you. But it never really would have been. So it's just be realistic about what the industry you're going into is, and bear in mind that even the most successful people have periods when they can't get anything off the ground either. So it's not a solid career, but if you succeed in it, it's an exceptionally good and fun and rewarding and amazingly privileged place to be.
I think the other thing is, you say get into the industry, but it depends what you mean, what the industry is. We're mostly talking about film here, but actually the industry is film and television, really. And there's probably a lot more jobs in television in Britain than there are in film, and lots of people move between the two. And the fact is that, the broadcasters still have to fill the screens. And what happened through the recession, and it's shifting now with the recovery of it's shifting for ITV and Channel 4 with the recovery of advertising. The BBC has obviously had the dreadful licence fee hack, so their budgets are going down across the board. But what happened a couple of years ago in television was that budgets were getting tighter, so controllers were being told they had to save lots of money. So they would sort of look around at what they had coming down the pipeline, and they'd go, oh, that drama, that's really, we'll axe that drama, and oh, that comedy series, that's expensive, we'll get rid of that, and that entertainment, that big entertainment show we're going to do, oh, that's expensive, we'll get rid of that. And then they looked at their schedule, and they had all these gaps. So then they went, oh, get some factual stuff, that's cheap. And so actually, as a documentary maker, last year was our busiest year. And last year was, we broadcast last year what we'd been making for the year 18 months or so before that. And we had more films go out last year than, I think in the first 5 years of True Vision, which is my company, we broadcast about 8 films. And last year, we broadcast 8 films. So, the recession certainly didn't hit factual television at all, frankly.
We've got time for maybe more than one last question. Julia?
What advice would you give to sort of the many young filmmakers in this room to go about financing their first film? Because it's an ever-changing thing. The industry and how you finance a first film today is very different than it would have been a few years ago.
I don't know if it is that different.
With the evolution of technology.
Yeah, in theory, I suppose it might be slightly easier because it's perfectly acceptable to make a film on all sorts of mediums now, whether it's from your phone up, really. There's never been more ways to make a film. But the finance sources are as tricky as they ever were, so beg.
Werner Herzog there was an Imagine on the BBC Two Arts series on Werner Herzog. And in that, he was being interviewed, and he said, when I first started, my first film, I had to steal the camera from my film school. I then had to steal the film as well, the stock, to shoot it on. I then had to borrow a Steenbeck, had to go in at weekends, borrow a Steenbeck. And, I get young people now saying to me, oh, how do I make my first film? And I snatch their phone from their hip and say, you use this, and you use your laptop. And it's easy now, and anyone can make a film, and there's no excuse for anyone not to make films. So that's his attitude, that it's actually the technology makes it far easier. And there's a lot of truth in that. The fact is, the industry, television and film, is desperate for new talent, is desperate for new creative people and people doing something different and special. And everyone wants to see something great first, and then go, oh, that's a great bit of talent. Let's produce them. And it's very easy to publish. You can shoot a film on your mobile phone, or even better, you can get an HD camera for 200 quid now, and you can cut it on Final Cut for, you can borrow someone's Mac and cut it beautifully on Final. Feature films can be cut on Final Cut, so it's very easy to do that, and then you can publish it as well. You can upload it to Vimeo, you can upload it to YouTube, you can upload it all over the place, and people will maybe then watch it if you're lucky, and you never know who's going to be the person who's going to look at it. So I think the first thing to do is, of course you need to plan your career, and you need to write to people, you need to try and get a job and all that kind of thing, but you also need to make stuff. You need to make shorts, you need to make whatever turns you on, whatever you're excited about, you need to be making it. Because the other thing is, as you're making it, you'll learn loads. You'll make lots of, as Tanya said, you'll make lots of mistakes, and every time you make a mistake, you'll learn something from it.
I mean, I'd say that the best advice to give to anyone trying to finance a first film is just make it as good as you possibly can. Don't give up on the story. Work really hard on the story. Get a script that is brilliant. When you talk to your friends and they say, what's it about? Work out how to really make it about something, and then to ask yourself, what's it really about? Has it got more than just a good narrative? Is it about something? Has it got a subtext? Is there a theme that's worth grappling with? And just tell everybody, bore everybody you know until you've worked out when their eyes are glazing over and they don't want to hear anymore, or when they light up and they're desperate to find out what happens next. Because if you've got a good piece of material, we're all desperate for a good piece of material, and there aren't as many good pieces of material out there as you may think. So make yours as good as it possibly can be, and you'll probably get it financed.
I mean, all the commissioning editors I've ever spoken to, I've ever asked the question of, when they first become commissioning editors, when they've first gone into the BBC or Channel 4, they've been really excited to see all the amazing ideas that are coming in and be part of the process. You know, they've been on the outside as filmmakers, they're now inside the broadcaster, they're getting to make the decision on what's made. And they will say, it's just really depressing because there are very many good ideas. You know, the really good ideas stand out a mile high because BBC probably gets 5,000 or 10,000 ideas emailed to it every week, and most of them are really crap. and that's the problem. You know, good ideas do stand out. Often they don't stand out until they're made. You know, often people can't see them, and so if you've got a passion, and you know what Tony was saying about drama is the same with documentary. You know, what if you're interested in documentary and you want to make something, then the things that make great drama are the things that make great documentary. Primarily character and narrative. You know, if you've got good character and you've got a great story, then whether it's a drama or a documentary, it'll be a good watch.
We've got time for one final question.
Just considering that theme of funding, there's been a lot of talk about crowdfunding. Are we witnessing a paradigm shift or not?
So I missed that.
Crowdfunding.
Crowdfunding.
Yeah,
I mean, crowdfunding is more common in docs, really, and you know, it's worked for some. Crowdfunding has worked for some people. Mostly, it tends to work better once you've made something, because you've got to, you know, who's the crowd who's going to fund it? The crowd who generally is going to fund it are the people who liked your first film. So you can crowdfund. The fact is, you're still, for the most part, you're still going to get very much less than if you can get, you know, an HBO or a BBC or someone like that to come in with the money. But it's certainly worth trying. And the fact is that, you know, as I was saying before, you don't need much money actually to make. You know, people can make great films for a few £1,000s, and you can crowdfund quite a small. Emily, I can't remember her last name. Anyway, there's a girl who's making a film at the moment called Just Do It, which you may have seen on the internet. She's been crowdfunding that for the last couple of years, and she raised about £25,000, which, you know, is a substantial sum when you're making a documentary. That's you know, enough to get you quite a long way down the line. Are we seeing a paradigm shift? I doubt it, to be honest. Not yet. You know, I mean, the fact is that I've heard for years people talking about, oh, television's dead, you know, and it's all, you know, the internet's changing everything and all that kind of thing. The fact is, certainly in documentary, the vast proportion of the money is in television. That's where most money for documentary comes from. And the feature docs are, you know, a very small amount of money in a very small number of hours, frankly. So I don't think crowdfunding is going to change much.
I think we'll have to draw the evening to this event to a close there. I'm going to hand over to Ellie and Alice in 1 minute. But first, would you just join me in thanking Tanya, Brian and David for their really interesting answers tonight. So thank you very much.
Luckily, we ended up talking about just making films, because now there is a chance to head over to film from Cambridge